Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. This one is for all my fellow Dirtsea students.
Absolutely.
Gearing up for the CE board exam.
Yeah.
And I gotta say,
Big one coming up.
yeah, this one's a little intimidating for me.
Oh, yeah.
RA 11158, the Occupational Safety and Health Standards Act.
It's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful.
Yeah, but super important
Super important.
for obvious reasons.
Yeah. So I'm hoping you can break this down for me and for all of our listeners out there.
For sure. For sure. So basically, RA 11158, it's all about keeping people safe at work.
Okay.
It's a whole bunch of rules and guidelines that help prevent accidents and protect everyone's health and safety on the job.
Okay, so like a giant safety net.
Exactly. A giant safety net for every single person involved in a project.
So does this apply to like everyone in the Philippines, every worker?
So it applies to all employees in the private sector,
Okay.
regardless of what industry they're in.
Got it.
So yeah, future civil engineers, that includes us.
Okay, good.
Now, government employees, they have their own set of regulations, but
Okay.
for us in the private sector, RA 11058, that's the gold standard.
Gotcha. So that begs the question, what are some of those key safety measures that this law puts in place?
Oh, tons.
I'm guessing PPE is a big one.
You bet PPE is absolutely essential.
Okay.
RA 11058, it says that employers, they have to provide the right PPE to their employees,
Makes sense.
and not just any old gear. It has to meet specific safety standards. We're talking hard hats, gloves.
Sure.
Goggles, those have to meet the ANSI Z87.1 standard for impact resistance.
Wow. Okay.
Steel toe boots, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
And really important here, employers have to provide this PPE at no cost to the employee.
Right. You don't want folks cutting corners because they can't afford the right gear.
Exactly.
What else? What else is in this law? What else does it cover?
So beyond PPE, we're also talking things like making sure workplaces have those proper emergency exits, the ones that you can actually use in an emergency.
Not blocked or locked.
Not blocked or locked, exactly. You got to have regular safety training as well.
Okay.
And it's not just a one-time thing.
Sure.
Employers got to provide ongoing training so that everybody's up to date on all the protocols.
Makes sense. So we've got training, PPE, emergency exits. What if you're on a job site and something just feels off, like the scaffolding looks a little iffy or there's exposed wires everywhere? What happens then?
That's where this really powerful part of RA 1158 comes in. It's called the right to refuse unsafe work.
Okay.
It means if you think a task or just your work environment is seriously risky to your health or your safety, you can say no.
Really?
You have the right to refuse that work without fear of losing your job.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah, so let's say you're asked to work on a roof and you don't have a safety harness, or
Oh, yeah.
you have to operate a piece of heavy machinery that hasn't been maintained properly.
Right.
You can refuse that work and you should report that hazard to your supervisor.
That's awesome. Okay, so what happens if your supervisor's like, nah, you're good, just get back to work?
Well, that's where the reporting process comes in.
Okay.
RA 11158 has a very clear procedure for these safety concerns.
Okay.
The first thing you always want to do is talk to your supervisor.
Okay.
But if that doesn't work, you can go to the company's Safety and Health Committee.
Okay.
And if you're still not getting anywhere, you can contact DOL directly.
Wow. So there's like a system in place.
There's a system in place to make sure those safety concerns are heard.
I love it. Okay, so beyond protecting workers, are there any other benefits to following RA 11158?
Yeah, definitely. When companies make safety a priority, it just creates a better work environment.
Right.
You know, you're going to have happier employees, people are going to be more productive.
Sure.
It can even help companies attract and retain top talent because no one wants to work in a place where safety is an afterthought.
That's true. So it's not just about avoiding penalties, it's about making a workplace where everybody feels valued and protected.
You got it. And then from a legal perspective,
Okay.
following RA 1158, it protects everyone involved.
Okay.
So let's say there's an accident
Yeah.
and the employer wasn't following the law.
Uh-oh.
They could face some serious legal consequences.
Okay, so it benefits everybody to have a safe work environment. But just to be clear, who is ultimately responsible for making sure RA 158 is actually happening on a project?
So everyone has a role to play, but the main responsibility falls on the employers.
Okay.
They need to make sure all those safety measures are in place, from providing PPE to doing the training,
Right.
and creating that culture where workers feel comfortable reporting hazards.
Okay, so leadership sets the tone from the top down.
100%. Of course, employees also have a responsibility.
Yeah.
They need to follow protocols, wear their PPE, report hazards,
Yeah.
participate in the training. You know, it's a two-way street. Everybody needs to be on board with safety.
Okay, so promoting a true safety culture goes beyond just checking the boxes and following the minimum rules, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's about being proactive. It's about always looking for ways to improve and prevent those accidents.
So things like regular safety meetings or making sure everyone knows how to properly use their PPE.
Exactly. And it's just as important to make sure workers feel like they can report hazards without being punished or ignored.
Right.
It's all about open communication.
Gotcha. Okay, so I'm getting the big picture here, but since we're all future civil engineers, let's zoom in on the construction industry.
Okay.
What are some of the things in RA 11058 that apply specifically to construction sites?
Okay, well, construction sites are full of potential hazards.
Yeah.
So when it comes to PPE, it's not just a hard hat and gloves.
Sure.
You're also talking safety goggles, hearing protection.
Okay.
Those high-vis vests, steel-toe boots, and sometimes even respiratory protection.
Wow.
If there's hazardous materials involved, and again, the employer, it's their legal responsibility to provide all of that.
At no cost to the employee.
Exactly.
Okay, what about safety training? How often does that need to happen on a construction site?
So new employees, they need a thorough safety orientation as soon as they're hired.
Makes sense.
That covers all the site-specific hazards, all the procedures.
Right.
And then refresher courses, those should be provided at least once a year or more often if it's a high-risk job.
So it's not just a one and done. You got to keep safety top of mind all the time.
Exactly. And construction sites, they also have this key player, the safety officer.
Yeah, the safety superhero.
Exactly. They make sure the site is complying with all those RA 11-1058 requirements.
That sounds like a big job. What exactly does that role involve?
It's a lot. They do everything from risk assessments to investigating accidents, making sure everybody's up to date on the protocols, and they're also the liaison with Dole.
Wow, that's a lot of responsibility.
Big responsibility. And then when it comes to construction sites, having those emergency procedures and fire safety measures, super crucial.
I can imagine. So what does that look like in practice?
So emergency plans have to include things like evacuation routes, first aid stations, fire extinguishers, the works.
Yeah.
But it's not enough to just have them, you got to practice them.
Regular fire drills?
Absolutely. And employers, they have to make sure everyone knows what to do in an emergency. It could be a fire, a chemical spill, a medical emergency. You got to be prepared for anything.
Yeah, it's all about being prepared for the unexpected. Okay, so RA 111058, it takes construction safety very seriously. But construction sites, they're not just about ladders and hammers. There's also all this heavy machinery. How does the law address that?
You're right. Heavy machinery, it adds a whole other level of complexity to safety.
Yeah.
So RA 11058, it really emphasizes proper maintenance, making sure the operators are trained.
Okay.
And that all the equipment has the necessary safety guards to prevent injuries.
So no one's operating a crane unless they know what they're doing and the crane is in good working order.
Exactly. And then for hazardous chemicals,
right,
which are common on construction sites,
yeah,
employers need clear procedures for handling labeling and disposal.
Okay.
That includes providing material safety data sheets, or MSDS.
MSDS?
Yeah, they outline the risks of each chemical and the safety precautions.
Okay, so it's not just physical safety, it's about understanding those potential dangers of the materials.
Absolutely. And speaking of danger, there's this concept in RA 1158 that's super important to understand. It's called imminent danger.
Imminent danger. Okay, that sounds scary. What exactly does that mean?
So it means there's a really high chance of an accident happening.
Okay.
An accident that could cause death or serious injury.
Got it.
So think of a trench that's about to collapse or a crane that's operating with visible damage.
Yikes. Okay, those are situations where you need to take action immediately.
Exactly. And in those cases, Dole can step in and take action to get rid of the danger. They can even shut down the whole site.
Wow. They have some real power when it comes to enforcement.
They do, but it's not just about Dole, cracking the whip. Employees have responsibilities too when it comes to safety.
Right. It sounds like a team effort. What happens if there's a workplace accident? Despite everybody's best efforts, what are the steps that need to be taken?
The first thing is to make sure everyone is safe. Provide first aid if you need to. If it's serious, call emergency services. Once things have calmed down, it's important to document what happened. Take photos.
Okay.
Get witness statements if you can.
Gotcha. So it's all about creating a clear record of what happened.
Exactly. And if you need to file a formal report with Dole, especially if it was serious or you think someone was negligent.
Okay, so transparency is key. I'm starting to feel like a bit of a safety expert myself. But before we move on, I have a few questions that I think a lot of our fellow Jerksey students might be wondering about.
Okay, shoot.
Okay, so does RA 1058 apply to small businesses too? Or is it just for big corporations?
Applies to everybody, but smaller businesses, they might get a little more flexibility.
Okay.
Depending on their risk assessment.
So it's not one size fits all?
It's not one size fits all. The focus is on safety, but how they achieve it can be tailored.
Gotcha. Okay, here's one that's super relevant for future civil engineers. How does RA 11058 actually ensure engineering safety in those big infrastructure projects?
That's a great question. So RA 11058, it works together with building codes and engineering standards
Okay.
to make sure those projects are built with safety in mind from the very beginning.
So safety is baked into the design.
You got it. It's all about considering those safety factors,
Yeah.
using the right materials, following those strict construction processes.
So safety is a part of every single stage of the project.
Exactly. And that's where, as future civil engineers, you'll play a big role.
I like it.
You'll need to know those standards and make sure they're being followed.
Awesome. Okay, so it's a holistic approach to safety, from the blueprints to the building process. And speaking of construction, we can't forget about working at heights.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
One of the biggest risks on any construction site. So how does RA 11058 address that?
For any work at height,
Yeah.
employers have to provide fall protection equipment.
Okay.
We're talking harnesses, guardrails, safety nets.
So no more dangling precariously from a ladder without a harness.
Not if they want to comply with the law. And they also have to make sure workers know how to use that equipment.
Right, a harness doesn't do much good if you don't know how to put it on properly.
Exactly. And they also need to do risk assessments for any work at height, identify those hazards, and put those control measures in place.
Multifaceted approach.
Safety is never a one-size-fits-all thing.
Right.
It takes planning assessment commitment from everybody.
Okay, so I'm really starting to see how deep and complex RA 1188 is, and how it really goes beyond just rules. It's about creating a safety culture that's a part of everything on a construction project.
Absolutely.
Well, I have to say, you've really broken it down for me. I'm starting to understand why it's so important, not just for the exam, but for being a good civil engineer.
Exactly. It's not about memorizing facts for the exam.
Yeah.
It's about developing a safety mindset that you'll carry with you throughout your career.
I love that. Okay, so before we move on to part 2, any other key takeaways that our listeners, especially those future civil engineers, should keep in mind?
I think the most important thing is this understanding and following RA 11058. It's not just about passing the exam. It's about building a safe and successful career as a civil engineer.
I like that. It's about building a safe and successful career as a civil engineer. And as civil engineers, we're often going to be in leadership roles on these projects.
That's right.
So we have a responsibility to make sure everyone on our team goes home safe every day.
You got it. It's a big responsibility and one that we can't take lightly.
Very well said. Okay, so we've covered a ton of information in this deep dive.
We dove.
But before we wrap up part 1,
Yeah.
I want to leave you with a question to think about. Imagine yourself leading a major construction project. What steps would you take to create a safety culture that makes sure everyone goes home safe every single day?
Ooh, that's a great question, and one that every future civil engineer should be thinking about. We'll dive deeper into that in part 2, so stay tuned.
Awesome.
Welcome back. Now, before we took that break, we left you with a pretty big question about creating a safety culture on those construction projects.
It's a big one.
So let's dive into that now.
Yeah. I'm still thinking about that question. You know, it's one thing to know all the rules,
Right.
but actually putting them into practice and like building that safety culture
Yeah.
seems like a whole other challenge.
You're absolutely right. It is a challenge, but it's also super rewarding.
Okay.
As civil engineers, you guys have this amazing opportunity to lead the way
Yeah.
in creating these safer work environments. So let's talk about some concrete steps you can take to make that happen.
Okay, I'm ready. Where do we even start?
Well, it all starts with leadership.
Yeah.
You know, they say actions speak louder than words.
Right.
So as a leader, you need to show your team that you're committed to safety.
By doing it yourself.
Exactly. So if you're walking around the site without your hard hat
Yeah.
or cutting corners on safety procedures,
Uh-huh.
you think your team is going to take safety seriously.
No, probably not. It really seems like setting a good example is like the key
It's huge.
to building that safety first mindset.
It is. And another important thing is communication.
Okay.
You need to create an environment where workers feel comfortable reporting hazards,
Right.
near misses, anything that's concerning them,
Okay.
no matter how small.
So no one should be afraid to speak up if they see something risky. How do you actually make that happen, though?
So there are a few things you can do. First, make safety a regular topic of conversation.
Okay.
Not just during those mandatory trainings.
Okay.
Have regular safety meetings, do toolbox talks.
Yeah.
Be present on the site, walk around, talk to your team.
Visible.
Exactly, and listen to their feedback.
So make it a part of every day.
Yes, make safety part of the daily routine and show them you're engaged. You're not just delegating it to somebody else.
Yeah, you're leading by example.
Exactly. You want safer to be everybody's responsibility.
Right.
And you want people to feel comfortable speaking up without being afraid of getting in trouble.
And speaking of getting in trouble, let's go back to that whistleblowing thing for a second.
Oh, okay.
So RA 11158 protects whistleblowers.
It does.
But I feel like in the real world, some workers might still be scared to report something,
Yeah.
especially if they think it might slow down the project or get someone in trouble.
Yeah, for sure.
How do you address that?
Well, it's really important to create a culture of positive reinforcement.
Okay.
So when somebody reports a safety issue, thank them for it.
Okay.
Acknowledge their contribution to a safer work environment, even if it seems small.
So recognize that they're doing the right thing.
Exactly. Even if it might cause a temporary inconvenience,
Right.
you want to encourage that proactive behavior.
Okay.
And then on the flip side, if someone's caught breaking a safety rule,
Yeah.
don't just punish them. Use it as a chance to teach them and reinforce the importance of safety.
So it's about prevention and education
Exactly.
rather than punishment.
The goal is to create that safe work environment,
Right.
not to play the blame game.
I like that. Okay, so even with the best safety culture, accidents can still happen.
They can't.
So what should a civil engineer do if there's an accident on their site?
Well, the first thing you have to do is make sure everyone's okay.
Okay.
Provide first aid, call 911 if you need to, and once things are stable, you need to
To
investigate.
figure out what happened.
Exactly. You need to figure out what caused the accident so you can prevent it from happening again.
Okay, so it's not just about cleaning up the mess.
Right.
It's about learning from it.
Exactly. You want to learn from the accident and stop it from happening again.
So accidents can be learning experiences.
They can be if we have the right mindset.
Right.
And of course, you need to document the accident and report it to DOL.
Of course, transparency is key.
It is, but beyond responding to accidents, what can civil engineers do to prevent them in the first place?
Yeah, good question.
One of the best tools you have is risk assessment.
Risk assessment.
It's all about identifying those potential hazards on the job site
Okay.
and then figuring out how likely they are to happen
Okay.
and how bad the consequences would be.
So anticipate problems and figure out how to stop them.
Exactly. Once you know the hazards, you can come up with ways to reduce the risk.
So like putting up safety barriers, providing the right PPE,
Yes.
changing work procedures.
You got it. And remember, risk assessment, it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process.
You got to keep reassessing as you go.
Exactly. As the project changes and you add new tasks, you need to keep looking at those risks.
Okay, so be proactive and adapt.
Exactly. Now let's talk about worker safety at heights.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
Big one, construction projects, you're often working way up high.
And falling from a height, that's a major hazard.
Major hazard. So RA 158 is very clear on this.
Okay.
For any work at height, employers need to provide fall protection.
Okay.
That could be harnesses, guardrails, safety nets, anything that will prevent a fall.
So no more workers balancing on scaffolding without a harness?
Not if they want to follow the law. And they also need to make sure the workers know how to use that equipment properly.
Right, you got to know how to use it.
And it's not just about the equipment.
Oh,
They also need to do those risk assessments for work at height, identify hazards, and put control measures in place.
Gotcha, so it's a multifaceted approach.
It is. Safety is never one size fits all.
Okay.
It takes careful planning, ongoing assessment, and everybody has to be committed.
Okay, this has been so helpful. You know, I'm really starting to understand RA 11058.
Good.
It's so much more than just rules.
Yeah.
It's really about creating this culture of safety that impacts every part of a construction project.
Exactly.
So before we wrap up part 2, I want to go back to that question you asked earlier about creating a safety culture.
Okay.
What are some of the key qualities of a really strong safety culture?
Okay.
And how can we, as future civil engineers, build that on our projects?
That's a great question and a perfect way to lead into part 3 of our deep dive.
Okay.
We're going to explore all those characteristics of a strong safety culture
Awesome.
and how to build one effectively. So stay tuned.
Okay, we're back, and I am ready to talk about those key qualities of a strong safety culture.
Yeah, this is where it gets real. You know, we can talk about the rules and regulations all day long.
Yeah,
But if you don't have a strong safety culture, it doesn't really matter.
right. So let's talk about it. What makes a workplace a place where safety is really part of the culture?
So one of the most important things is that everybody sees safety as their responsibility.
Okay.
It's not just the safety officer or the managers.
Right.
Everyone on the site, from the project manager to the workers, they should feel like they can speak up
Okay.
if they see something else safe.
So you create an environment where people feel comfortable saying something.
Exactly, without being afraid of getting in trouble or being made fun of.
Right. You have to have trust.
You have to have trust and open communication.
Okay.
Another key thing is that safety, it's not just about following the rules.
Okay.
It's about always looking for ways to do things better.
To improve.
To improve. You know, you have a culture of continuous learning.
Yep.
Accidents and near misses, those are seen as opportunities to learn and make changes so they don't happen again.
Right. You learn from your mistakes.
Exactly. Everybody's looking out for each other and trying to make things safer.
That's a great environment to work in. So how do we actually build that kind of culture? It seems like a lot.
It's definitely not easy, but it's possible.
Okay.
And one of the most important things is leadership.
Okay.
Leaders, they have to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Right, lead by example.
Exactly. You have to show your commitment to safety in what you do.
So actions speak louder than words.
They do. And as a leader, you also have to empower your team to care about safety.
Okay.
Encourage them to find those hazards, suggest ways to make things better,
Right.
and report any concerns without being afraid of getting in trouble.
So that trust and open communication, that's super important.
It's essential. And don't forget about recognition.
Okay.
When someone does something good for safety, acknowledge it, thank them, celebrate what they did.
And make them feel good about it.
Exactly. It really goes a long way in building that strong safety culture.
Makes sense. People want to do things that are appreciated.
Right. And remember, building a strong safety culture takes time.
Okay.
You have to put in the effort consistently. It doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
But it's so worth it.
Yeah.
A strong safety culture, it not only prevents accidents and injuries,
Right.
it also boosts morale, improves productivity, and people are just happier to come to work.
That's awesome. This has been so insightful. I'm really starting to get it.
Yep.
RA 1058 and building a strong safety culture, they're not just about passing the exam.
Right.
They're about being a good civil engineer.
A responsible and successful one.
Exactly. Well, I think we've covered just about everything on RA 105T8 and workplace safety. Any final thoughts?
Just this, as future civil engineers, you have a chance to really make a difference by making safety a priority and creating a workplace where everyone feels safe and valued.
Yeah.
You're not just building structures, you're building a legacy.
Powerful stuff. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with me and with all of our listeners.
My pleasure.
And to everyone listening out there, stay safe, stay informed.
Exactly.
And remember, building a safe and successful career starts with a commitment to safety.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.